The Allisons' country cottage, 7 miles from the nearest town, was set prettily on a hill. It had no heat, no running water, and no electricity. For 17 summers, Janet Allison had cooked on a kerosene stove. Robert Allison had brought buckets full of water daily from the pump, and read his paper by kerosene light in the evenings. The Allisons invariably left their summer cottage the Tuesday after Labor Day, and were as invariably sorry when the months of September and early October turned out to be pleasant and almost insufferably barren in the city. But it was not until this year that they overcame their traditional inertia enough to decide to stay in the cottage after Labor Day. "There isn't really anything to take us back to the city," Mrs. Allison told her husband seriously, as though it were a new idea. Consequently, with a slight feeling of adventure, Mrs. Allison went into their village the day after Labor Day and told those natives with whom she had dealings, with a pretty air of breaking away from tradition, that she and her husband had decided to stay at least a month longer at their cottage. "It isn't as though we had anything to take us back to the city," she said to Mr. Babcock, her grocer. "Nobody ever stayed at the lake past Labor Day before," he said. "Nobody." "But we're always sorry when we leave." "Well, I'd hate to leave myself," Mr. Babcock said after deliberation. "But I never heard of anyone ever staying out at the lake after Labor Day before." Since this was their big trip into town, which they made only once every 2 weeks, they spent all day at it. This trip, Mrs. Allison was tempted by the set of glass baking dishes in the hardware and clothing and general store. While Mr. Charlie Walpole laboriously unfolded newspapers to wrap around the dishes, she said, "'Course, I could have waited and gotten those dishes in New York, but we're not going back so soon this year." "Heard you were staying on," Mr. Charlie Walpole said. His old fingers fumbled maddeningly with newspaper. "Don't know about staying on up there, not after Labor Day." "I feel sort of like we belong here more," she said, "staying on after everyone else has left." To prove this, she smiled brightly across the store at a woman with a familiar face, who might have been the woman who sold berries to the Allisons one year, or the woman who occasionally helped in the grocery, and was probably Mr. Babcock's aunt. "Well," Mr. Charlie Walpole said. He shoved the package a little across the counter. "Never been summer people before at the lake after Labor Day. Never." "They're great people," Mrs. Allison told her husband as they went together down the sidewalk after meeting at the door of the hardware store. "They're so solid and so reasonable." "Makes you feel good knowing there are still towns like this," Mr. Allison said. "You know, in New York," Mrs. Allison said, "I might have paid a few cents less for these dishes, but there wouldn't have been anything sort of personal in the transaction." The next morning the Allisons sat out on the little lawn they'd made at the top of the hill and watched the changing lights on the lake, alternating gray and blue as clouds moved quickly across the sun. "Looks like we might have some rain," Mr. Allison said, squinting at the sky. "Good for the crops," Mrs. Allison said laconically, and they both laughed. The kerosene man, whose name Mrs. Allison had never learned, came the next morning. "I'm glad to see you," Mrs. Allison told him. "We're getting pretty low." "Thought you folks would be leaving," he said, staring uncomfortably at Mrs. Allison, his truck motor still going. "We're staying on another month," Mrs. Allison said brightly. "Can't give you no oil, though." "What do you mean?" "I don't get so much oil myself after Labor Day." Mrs. Allison reminded herself that city manners were no good with country people, and smiled engagingly. "But can't you get extra oil, at least while we stay?" I order this oil down from maybe 50 miles away back in June for the summer. Then I order again, about November." He tightened his hands on the wheel in preparation for departure. "But can't you give us some?" Mrs. Allison said. "Don't know as you could get oil anywheres right now," the man said consideringly. The truck began to move. Mrs. Allison ran a few steps, calling, "Will you try to get us some next week?" "Don't see's I can," the man said. The truck drove away, and Mrs. Allison watched it go with anger. Just let him try coming round next summer, she told herself. When Mrs. Allison told her husband, he was not particularly impressed. "Probably keeping it all for a high price during the winter. What's happened to Anne and Jerry, do you think?" Anne and Jerry were their son and daughter, one living in Chicago, one in the far west. Their dutiful weekly letters were late. "Ought to realize how we wait for their letters," he said. "Well, dear, I'm going to go call Mr. Babcock and tell him to send up some kerosene." "At least a postcard," Mr. Allison said as she left. As with most of the cottage's inconveniences, the Allisons no longer noticed the phone particularly, but yielded to its eccentricities without conscious complaint. Mrs. Allison had to crank the phone 3 times before the operator answered, and then it was still longer before Mr. Babcock picked up the receiver in the corner of the grocery. He said, "Store?" "This is Mrs. Allison, Mr. Babcock. I thought I'd give you my order a day early because I wanted to be sure and get some—" "Mrs. Allison," Mr. Babcock said, "you'll come and pick it up?" "Pick it up? I thought I'd have you send it out as usual." "Well, I got no one to deliver. I only got a boy delivering summers, you see." "Well, couldn't you just send out an order today, Mr. Babcock?" "It wouldn't hardly pay delivering with no one else out at the lake." "What about Mr. Hall?" "Hall? They've gone to visit her folks upstate, Mrs. Allison." "But they bring all our butter and eggs." "Left yesterday." "But I told Mr. Hall—" Mrs. Allison started to say and then stopped. "I'll send Mr. Allison in after some groceries tomorrow." "You got all you need till then," Mr. Babcock said. It was not a question. After she hung up, Mrs. Allison went slowly out to sit again in her chair next to her husband. "You'll have to go in tomorrow," she said. "We've got just enough kerosene to last till you get back." "He should have told us sooner," Mr. Allison said. It was not possible to remain troubled long in the face of the day. The lake moved quietly below them with the almost incredible softness of a summer picture. Mrs. Allison sighed deeply. The next morning, Mr. Allison, duly armed with a list of groceries with kerosene in large letters at the top, went down the path to the garage. Mrs. Allison was starting to pare some apples when her husband flung open the screen door into the kitchen. "Damn car won't start," he announced. "Well, it was all right on Tuesday." "Well," Mr. Allison said between his teeth, "it's not all right on Friday." "Can you fix it?" "No. Gotta call someone." "Who?" "Man runs the filling station, I guess." A little apprehensive, Mrs. Allison went on paring apples absent-mindedly, while she listened to Mr. Allison with the phone, ringing, waiting again, and then slamming down the receiver. "He's probably gone out for a minute," Mrs. Allison said nervously. She was not quite sure what made her so nervous, unless it was the probability of her husband's losing his temper completely. Mr. Allison slumped into one of the kitchen chairs. "Why don't you go down and get the mail and then call him again?" "Guess I might as well. But if there's no mail—" And leaving an awful silence behind him, he went off down the path. The room seemed unexpectedly dark, and Mrs. Allison herself felt in the state of tension that preceded a thunderstorm, but when she looked, the sky was clear and serene. And when she went again to look outside, she saw her husband coming up the path. He seemed more cheerful. "From Jerry," he called. "At last, a letter." Mrs. Allison looked with an eagerness that surprised her on the familiar handwriting of her son. "Dear Mother and Dad," it began. "I'm glad this goes to the lake, as usual. We always thought you ought to stay up there as long as you could." Uneasily, Mrs. Allison reached out and picked up the empty envelope, not knowing exactly what she wanted from it. It was addressed, quite as usual, in Jerry's handwriting, and was postmarked Chicago. She read on with her husband. "Been playing a lot of bridge lately with some people you don't know. Nice young couple, about our age. Well, we'll close now, as I guess it bores you to hear about things so far away. Have a good time up at the lake, and don't bother about hurrying back. Love from all of us, Jerry." "Funny," Mr. Allison commented. "Doesn't sound like Jerry," said Mrs. Allison. She turned the letter over, frowning. "Going to try that phone call again," Mr. Allison said. Mrs. Allison read the letter twice more, trying to find a phrase that sounded wrong. Then her husband came back and said very quietly, "Phone's dead." After lunch, the Allisons went to sit outside, but their afternoon was cut short by the gradually increasing storm clouds. In the evening, sitting close together inside their cottage, they turned on the battery radio. The only light came from the lightning outside and the small, square glow from the dial of the radio. During one pause between commercials, Mrs. Allison turned and smiled weakly at her husband. I wonder if we're supposed to do anything," she said. "Just wait," Mr. Allison said consideringly. And then, under the trivial melody of the dance band, "The car had been tampered with, you know." Mrs. Allison hesitated. "I suppose the phone wires were cut?" "I imagine so." After a while, the dance music stopped. Mrs. Allison glanced out at the smooth surface of the lake and the waiting storm and said conversationally, "I feel better about that letter of Jerry's." "I knew when I saw the light down at the Hall place last night," Mr. Allison said. The wind slapped hard at the windows. Mr. and Mrs. Allison involuntarily moved closer together, and with the first sudden crash of thunder, Mr. Allison took his wife's hand. And then, while the lightning flashed outside and the radio faded and sputtered, the two old people huddled together in their summer cottage and waited. Miss Adela Strangeworth stepped daintily along Main Street on her way to the grocery. The sun was shining, the air was fresh, and everything in Miss Strangeworth's little town looked washed and bright. She knew everyone in town, of course. She was fond of telling strangers, tourists, who sometimes passed through the town and stopped to admire Miss Strangeworth's roses, that she had never spent more than a day outside this town in all her long life. She was 71, she told them, with a pretty little dimple showing by her lip. And she sometimes found herself thinking that the town belonged to her. "My grandfather built the first house on Pleasant Street," she would say, opening her blue eyes wide with the wonder of it. "This house right here. My grandmother planted these roses, and my mother tended them, just as I do." Miss Strangeworth never gave away any of her roses, although the tourists often asked her. The roses belonged on Pleasant Street. When she came into the grocery, half a dozen people turned away from the shelves and the counters to wave at her or call out good morning. "And good morning to you, too, Mr. Lewis," she said at last. The Lewis family had been in the town almost as long as the Strangeworths. "Good morning," Mr. Lewis said, and added politely, "Lovely day." "It is a very nice day," Miss Strangeworth said, as though she had only just decided that it would do after all. "Are those strawberries from Arthur Parker's garden?" "He brought them in this morning," Mr. Lewis said. "I shall have a box." "Mr. Lewis looked very tired," Miss Strangeworth almost commented, but it was far too personal a subject to be introduced to Mr. Lewis. Miss Strangeworth moved slightly to make room for Mrs. Harper at the counter. "Morning, Adela," Mrs. Harper said, and Mrs. Strangeworth said, "Good morning, Martha." "Ran out of sugar," Mrs. Harper explained. Her hand shook slightly as she opened her pocketbook. "Martha," said Miss Strangeworth, "you don't look well." "I'm perfectly all right," Mrs. Harper said shortly, and went out without speaking again. Miss Strangeworth shook her head slightly. Martha Harper did not look well. Carrying her little bag of groceries, Miss Strangeworth came out of the store into the bright sunlight and stopped to smile down on the Crane baby. Dawn and Helen Crane were really the two most infatuated young parents she had ever known, she thought indulgently, looking at the lace-edged carriage cover. "That little girl is going to grow up expecting luxury all her life," she said to Helen Crane. Helen laughed. "That's the way we want her to feel," she said, "like a princess." "How old is Her Highness now?" Miss Strangeworth said dryly. 6 months next Tuesday," Helen Crane said, looking down with rapt wonder at her child. "I've been worrying, though, about her. Don't you think she ought to move around more? Try to sit up, for instance?" "For plain and fancy worrying," Miss Strangeworth said, amused, "give me a new mother every time." "She just seems slow," Helen Crane said. "Nonsense. All babies are different." "That's what my mother says," Helen Crane laughed, looking a little bit ashamed. Smiling to herself and shaking her old head, Miss Strangeworth went on down the sunny street, stopping and talking for a few minutes outside the library with Miss Chandler, the librarian. Miss Strangeworth noticed that Miss Chandler had not taken much trouble with her hair that morning, and sighed. Miss Strangeworth hated sloppiness. Many people seemed disturbed recently, she thought. Only yesterday the Stewarts' 15-year-old Linda had run crying down her own front walk and all the way to school, not caring who saw her. People around town thought she might have had a fight with a Harris boy, but they showed up together at the soda shop after school as usual, both of them looking grim and bleak. From halfway down the block, Miss Strangeworth could catch the heavy scent of her roses. She stopped at her own front gate and looked with deep pleasure at her house, with the red and pink and white roses massed along the narrow lawn, and the rambler going up along the porch. She unlocked her front door and went into the kitchen to put away her groceries. Then she went into the light, lovely sitting room. She went to the narrow desk in the corner and unlocked it. She never knew when she might feel like writing letters, so she kept her notepaper inside and the desk locked. Miss Strangeworth's usual stationery was heavy and cream-colored, but when she felt like writing her other letters. She used a pad of various colored paper bought from the local newspaper shop. Although Mrs. Strangeworth's desk held a trimmed quill pen, she always used a dull stub of pencil when she wrote her letters, and she printed them in a childish block print. After thinking for a minute, although she had been phrasing the letter in the back of her mind all the way home, she wrote on a pink sheet, "Some people just shouldn't have children, should they?" She was pleased with the letter. She was fond of doing things exactly right. After thinking for a minute, she decided that she would like to write another letter, perhaps to go to Martha Harper. She selected a green sheet this time and wrote quickly, "Have you found out yet what they were all laughing about after you left the bridge club? Is the wife really always the last one to know?" Miss Strangeworth never concerned herself with facts. Her letters all dealt with the more negotiable stuff of suspicion. Mr. Lewis would never have imagined for a minute that his grandson might be lifting petty cash from the store register if he had not had one of Miss Strangeworth's letters. Linda Stewart's parents would have gone unsuspectingly ahead with their lives, never aware of possible evil lurking nearby, if Miss Strangeworth had not sent letters to open their eyes. Miss Strangeworth would have been genuinely shocked if there had been anything between Linda Stewart and the Harris boy, but as long as evil existed unchecked in the world, it was Miss Strangeworth's duty to keep her town alert to it. There were so many wicked people in the world, and only one Strangeworth. Besides, she liked writing her letters. She addressed an envelope to Don Crane, using a pink envelope to match the pink paper. Then she addressed a second envelope, green, to Martha Harper. Then an idea came to her, and she selected a blue sheet and wrote, "You never know about doctors. Suppose the knife slipped accidentally. Would Dr. Burns get his fee and a little extra from that nephew of yours?" She addressed the blue envelope to old Mrs. Foster, who was having an operation next month. She had been writing her letters for the past year. She never got any answers, of course, because she never signed her name. The town where she lived had to be kept clean and sweet, but people everywhere were lustful and evil and degraded and needed to be watched. She sighed, locked her desk, and put the letters in her big black leather pocketbook to be mailed when she took her evening walk. Sitting in the warm sunlight, seeing her roses massed outside, handling the fine translucent china, Miss Strangeworth was pleased. People must live graciously after all, she thought, and sipped her tea. Her kitchen set in order, she took up her hat and set off on her evening walk. There was always a group of young people around the post office. Miss Strangeworth smiled at them and quickly went on. It had been a long time since she had known the name of every child in town. The mail slot was in the door of the post office. Miss Strangeworth stood by the door, opening her black pocketbook to take out the letters, and heard a voice which she knew at once to be Linda Stewart's. Poor little Linda was crying again, and Miss Strangeworth listened carefully. "I can't tell you, Dave," Linda was saying. So she was talking to the Harris boy, as Miss Strangeworth had supposed. "I just can't. It's just nasty." "But why won't your father let me come around any more? What on earth did I do?" "I can't tell you. I just wouldn't tell you for anything. You've got to have a dirty mind for things like that." "But aren't I like one of the family?" "Not any more, Dave. You're not to come near our house again. My father said so. That's all I can tell you. But I didn't do anything. Just the same, my father said." Miss Strangeworth sighed and turned away. There was so much evil in people, even in a charming little town like this one. She slipped her letters into the slot, and 2 of them fell inside. The third caught on the edge and fell onto the ground. She did not notice it because she was wondering whether a letter to the Harris boy's father might not be of some service in wiping out this potential badness. Wearily, Miss Strangeworth turned to go home, and never heard the Harris boy calling to her to say that she had dropped something. "Old Lady Strangeworth's getting deaf," he said, looking after her and holding in his hand the letter. "Oh, it's for Don Crane. Might as well take it on over. We pass his house anyway." Miss Strangeworth awakened the next morning with a feeling of intense happiness, and for a minute wondered why, and then remembered that this morning 3 people would open her letters. Going downstairs, she found the mail on the hall floor and bent to pick it up. A bill, the morning paper, a letter in a green envelope that looked oddly familiar. Miss Strangeworth stood perfectly still for a minute, looking down at the green envelope with the penciled printing, and thought, "It looks like one of my letters. How did this get here?" Her hand did not shake as she opened the envelope and unfolded the sheet of green paper inside. She began to cry silently for the wickedness of the world when she read the words, "Look out at what used to be your roses." Mr. Halloran Beresford stepped out of the candy shop with a great box under his arm and started briskly for the corner. There were 20 small-sized grey suits like Mr. Beresford's on every New York block, 50 men still pressed after a day in an air-cooled office, 100 small men perhaps, pleased with themselves for remembering their wives' birthdays. Mr. Beresford walked along swiftly, humming musically to himself. He had spent a lot of time waiting in line to get his wife's favorite chocolates, and he really had to hurry a little. Mr. Beresford went a few steps into the street, said, "Taxi!" in a voice that went helplessly into a falsetto, and slunk back abashed while the taxi went by. A man in a light hat stopped next to Mr. Beresford, and for a minute stared at Mr. Beresford, and Mr. Beresford stared at him. What he saw was a thin face under the light hat, a small mustache, a coat collar turned up. Funny-looking guy, Mr. Beresford thought, lightly touching his own clean-shaven lip. Perhaps the man thought Mr. Beresford's almost unconscious gesture was offensive. At any rate, he frowned before he turned away. Ugly customer, Mr. Beresford thought. The Fifth Avenue bus Mr. Beresford usually took came slipping up to the corner. He had reached out his hand to take the rail when he was roughly elbowed aside, and the ugly customer in the light hat shoved on ahead of him. Mr. Beresford started to follow, but the bus door closed, and the last thing Mr. Beresford saw as the bus went off down the street was the man in the light hat grinning at him from inside. "There's a dirty trick," Mr. Beresford told himself. He waved again at a taxi, not trusting his voice, and was almost run down by a delivery truck. He started walking downtown. In 2 blocks, he would reach another bus stop, a good corner for taxis, and a subway station. He decided to swallow his annoyance and remember that it was his wife's birthday. He began to hum again as he walked. Mr. Beresford watched the people as he walked along. Surely the girl in the high-heeled shoes coming toward him with a frown on her face was not so able to put herself above petty trifles. The funny-looking guy in the light hat coming quickly through the crowd looked as though he hated someone. The funny-looking guy in the light hat. Mr. Beresford watched the man turn abruptly and start walking downtown. Well, what do you know about that? Mr. Beresford marveled. Probably got off the bus for some reason. Wrong bus, maybe. Halfway from the corner, he realized with a sort of sick shock that the man with the light hat was at his elbow, walking steadily along next to him. Mr. Beresford slowed his step. The other man slowed down. Nonsense, Mr. Beresford thought, and cut abruptly into a shop. A souvenir shop, he realized. He began to fuss with an elaborate cigarette box. The man in the light hat came into the shop, and Mr. Beresford busied himself picking up one thing after another from the counter. The thought of accosting the man crossed Mr. Beresford's mind fleetingly, and was succeeded, as always, by Mr. Beresford's vivid recollection of his own small size and innate cautiousness. Best, he decided, to avoid this man. He walked steadily toward the doorway of the shop, but had not quite reached the man in the light hat when the shop's clerk met Mr. Beresford with a genial smile and a vehement, "See anything you like, mister?" "Not tonight, thanks," Mr. Beresford said. But the clerk said, "Got some nice things you didn't look at?" "No, thanks." "Take a look," the clerk insisted. This was unusually persistent. "Easy does it," the man in the light hat said to the clerk. They continued to move forward, slowly. "Oh, see here now," Mr. Beresford said. "See here," he said, feeling the solid weight of the wall behind him. "Ready?" the man in the light hat said. Mr. Beresford, with a wild yell, broke between them and ran for the door. He heard a sound like a snarl behind him. "I'm safe on the street," Mr. Beresford thought. "As long as there are lots of people, they can't do anything to me." He looked back and saw the clerk standing in the doorway of the shop. The man in the light hat was on the corner ahead, leaning calmly against a building, lighting a cigarette. Mr. Beresford yelled boisterously, "Taxi!" in a great voice he had never suspected he possessed until now. A taxi stopped, as though not daring to disregard that great shout, and Mr. Beresford moved gratefully toward it. His hand was on the door handle when another hand closed over his, and Mr. Beresford was aware of the light hat brushing his cheek. "Come on, if you're coming," the taxi driver said. Mr. Beresford, resisting the push that urged him into the taxi, ran back to the sidewalk. A cross-town bus had stopped on the corner, and no longer thinking, he hurried onto it, went to the back, and sat down. The man in the light hat sat a little ahead. Mr. Beresford tried to think. Obviously the man in the light hat was not carrying a grudge all this time about Mr. Beresford's almost unconscious gesture towards his mustache. In any case, there was also the clerk in the souvenir shop. Mr. Beresford looked around. In the bus, there were only 5 people left. The driver, Mr. Beresford, the man in the light hat. The 2 others were an old lady and a man who looked as though he might be a foreigner. Foreign plot. Spies. Peering off into the growing darkness, Mr. Beresford noticed an odd thing. There had been someone standing beside a sign saying bus stop, and the bus had not stopped. Surprised, Mr. Beresford reached for the cord. As he went down the aisle, the foreign-looking man rose. "Getting off," he said. Mr. Beresford pressed forward, and somehow the old lady's shopping bag got in his way and spilled. "Oh, sorry," Mr. Beresford said desperately. The old lady caught his arm and said, "Don't bother if you're in a hurry, dear." Mr. Beresford tried to shake her off, but a coil of pink ribbon was caught around his shoe. The old lady said, "Oh, it was clumsy of me, leaving my bag right in the aisle." As Mr. Beresford broke away from her, the doors closed and the bus started. Over his shoulder, Mr. Beresford saw the man in the light hat sitting comfortably smoking, his head thrown back and his eyes shut. Mr. Beresford made his way forward to stand by the driver. "Getting off," he said. "Can't stop in the middle of the block," the driver said. "The next stop, then." The bus moved rapidly on. Mr. Beresford, bending down to see the streets out the front window, saw a sign saying bus stop. "Here," he said. "What?" the driver said, "going past." "Listen, I want to get off." "Next stop." "But you just passed one." "You didn't tell me in time." After a minute, Mr. Beresford saw another bus stop and said, "Okay." The bus did not stop. "Report me," the driver said. "My number's right here on this card." He seemed to be amused. "If you don't stop at the next stop," Mr. Beresford said, "I shall smash the glass and shout for help." "What with? That box of candy?" "How do you know it's—" Mr. Beresford said before he realized that if he got into conversation, he would miss the next bus stop. The bus pulled to a stop in front of a bus sign. "Okay," the bus driver said. "You were so anxious to get off." The man in the light hat got off at the rear door. Mr. Beresford hesitated. "I guess I'll stay on for a while." "Last stop," the bus driver said. "Everybody off." He looked sardonically up at Mr. Beresford. "Report me if you want to." Mr. Beresford got off and went directly up to the man in the light hat. "This is perfectly ridiculous," he said emphatically. The man in the light hat was not looking at him, but bored and fixedly over his shoulder. Mr. Beresford turned and saw a policeman standing on the corner. "Just you wait," he said. But halfway to the policeman, Mr. Beresford began to wonder again, what did he have to report? A bus driver, a clerk, a mysterious man in a light hat? Mr. Beresford bolted suddenly down a subway entrance. He was figuring as he ran, "He'll think, if I'm very stupid, I'd head downtown. If I'm smarter than that, I'd go uptown. If I'm really smart, I'd go downtown." The man in the light hat reached the downtown platform only a few seconds after Mr. Beresford, and sauntered down the platform. "It's no good," thought Mr. Beresford. "He knows just how smart I am." The train came blasting into the station. Mr. Beresford ran into one car and saw the light hat disappear into the next car. Just as the doors were closing, he caught the door and would have been out, except for a girl who seized his arm and shouted, "Harry, where in God's name are you going?" The door was held halfway open by Mr. Beresford's body. "He sure doesn't want to see his old friends," the girl said to the people in the car laughingly, and a big man stepped up to her with a grin and said, "If you gotta have him that bad, we'll bring him in for you." Mr. Beresford felt an irresistible force that drew him through the doors. "That ain't no way to treat a lady, chum," said the big man. The subway train was going downtown. Mr. Beresford, now racking his brains for detective tricks, thought of one that seemed foolproof. At 14th, he got off and went up and into the street. The large department store ahead of him advertised, "Open till 9 tonight." Mr. Beresford went in. The store bewildered him at first. Counters stretching away in all directions, voices clamoring. He came to a counter of odds and ends, bought a pair of dark glasses and put them on. He went out of the store. He could have chosen any of the 9 entrances. There was no sign of the light hat as he stepped up to the taxi stand. He reached his apartment building and stole cautiously into the lobby. In the elevator alone, Mr. Beresford took a long breath and began to wonder if he had dreamed his wild trip home. He rang his apartment bell. His wife came to the door. "You're terribly late, darling," his wife said, and then, "But what's the matter?" He looked at her. She was wearing her blue dress, and that meant she expected him to take her out. He handed her the box of candy limply, and she took it, hardly noticing it in her anxiety over him. "What on earth has happened? Darling, sit down. You look terrible." He let her lead him into the living room. "Is there something wrong?" she was asking, anxiously fussing over him. "Are you sick?" He realized he was glorying in all this attention, sighed deeply and said, "Oh, nothing wrong. I'll get you a drink." He put his head back against the soft chair as she went out. Never knew that door had a key, his mind registered dimly as he heard it turn. Then he was on his feet, with his head against the door, listening to her at the telephone in the hall. She dialed and waited. Then, "Listen," she said. "He came here after all. I've got him." Old Miss Harper was going home, although the night was wet and nasty. Miss Harper disliked traveling at any time, and she particularly disliked traveling on this dirty small bus, which was her only way of getting home. The rain was beating down, and Miss Harper hurried to the door. There were already several people sitting in the bus, and she wondered who would endure this kind of trip to get somewhere, even home. "Oh, I'm very out of sorts," Miss Harper thought. "It's too strenuous for a woman of my age." She had providentially taken a sleeping pill before leaving for the bus station, hoping to sleep through as much of the trip as possible. And at last, sitting near the back, she promised herself that it would not be unbearably long before she had a bath and a cup of tea. She was aware that the bus had started because she was rocked and bounced in her seat, even when she slept at last. Miss Harper slept uncomfortably and awkwardly, her mouth a little open. A little later, the bus driver was shaking her. "Look, lady," he was saying, "I'm not an alarm clock. Wake up and get off the bus." "What?" Miss Harper stirred, opened her eyes, felt for her pocketbook. "This is as far as you go. You got a ticket to here. And it's not part of my job to carry you off the bus. I'm not—" "I intend to report you," Miss Harper said, awake. She straightened her hat. "Report me, but from somewhere else. I got a bus to run. Now will you please get off?" Miss Harper was sickeningly aware of faces turned towards her. The driver turned and stamped off down the bus to his seat, saying, "She thinks I'm an alarm clock." And Miss Harper, without assistance and moving clumsily, took down her suitcase and struggled with it down the aisle. "I'll certainly report you," she said to the driver, who shrugged. The door was open, and Miss Harper eased herself and her suitcase onto the steep step. She had barely taken stock when the bus started with a jerk. "I'll report him," she thought. "I'll see that he loses his job." And then she realized that she was in the wrong place. Standing quite still in the rain and darkness, Miss Harper became aware that she was on an empty crossroads. There was nothing but a wet dirt road under her feet and a signpost. "Don't panic," Miss Harper told herself, almost whispering. "Don't panic. Don't be frightened." The signpost said, "Ricketts Landing." "So that's where I am," Miss Harper thought. "Ricketts Landing, and I don't like it here." She set her suitcase down and was crying a little when she saw headlights far off down the road. She ran to the middle of the road and stood waving. "Here," she called. "Please come and help me." The lights belonged to a small truck, and it came to an abrupt stop beside her, and the window near her was rolled down, and a man's voice said furiously, "You trying to get killed or something?" He turned and spoke to the driver. "Oh, it's some dame running out on a road like that." "Please," Miss Harper said. "Please help me. The bus put me off here when it wasn't my stop, and I'm lost." "Lost?" The young man laughed richly. "First I ever heard anyone getting lost in Ricketts Landing. Mostly they have trouble finding it." Miss Harper put on a willing smile and said, "Can you take me somewhere, perhaps a bus station?" "No bus station." The young man shook his head profoundly. "Well," Miss Harper's voice rose in spite of herself. She was suddenly afraid of antagonizing these men. Perhaps they might even leave her here where they found her, in the wet and dark. "Please," Miss Harper said, "I'll be glad to pay you what I can." "We'll take you to the old lady," the driver said. Without help, she somehow hoisted herself in. "Oh, this can't be happening to me," she thought. The driver started the truck, and they moved slowly down the road. Ahead of them a light flickered dimly in the rain, and the driver pointed and said, "There, that's where we're going." As they came closer, Miss Harper was aware of a growing dismay. The light belonged to what seemed to be a roadhouse, and Miss Harper had never been inside a roadhouse in her life. "Oh, not many people here tonight," the driver said, pulling up in the parking lot, which had once, Miss Harper was sad to see, been a garden. "Rain, probably." Peering through the window and the rain, Miss Harper felt suddenly a warm stir of recognition, of welcome. It had clearly been an old mansion once, solidly and handsomely built. "I used to live in a house like this," Miss Harper said, and the young men laughed. "I bet you did," one of them said, and Miss Harper stopped in the doorway, staring. Where there had certainly once been comfortable rooms, high-ceilinged and square, with tall doors and polished floors, there was now one large, dirty room with a counter and half a dozen battered tables. Sitting around the tables were perhaps a dozen young people, all talking and laughing flatly. For a minute, Miss Harper thought they were laughing at her. She followed the two young men across to the counter. "Belle, Belle," the driver said, "look at the stray cat we found." An enormous woman swung around in her seat at the end of the counter and looked at Miss Harper. "Hell, you say," the woman said at last. "Please," Miss Harper said. "They put me off my bus at the wrong stop, and I can't seem to find my way home." "Hell, you say," the woman said, and laughed, a gentle laugh. "She sure is wet," she said. "You'll take care of her?" the driver asked. He turned and smiled down at Miss Harper, obviously waiting, and remembering, Miss Harper fumbled in her pocketbook and chose 2 $5 bills from her wallet. She handed a $5 bill to each man. "Thanks," the driver said. "Oh, I could have gotten away with $1 each," Miss Harper thought. "Thank you," she said formally. "We got rooms for rent." The woman half turned back to the counter. "Cost you 10 for the night." "I suppose I should be grateful," Miss Harper thought. "I'd better, I guess," she said, taking out her wallet again. I mean, thank you." The woman accepted the bill and half turned back to the counter. "Upstairs," she said. "Take your choice." "Thank you." Miss Harper knew where the staircase would be, and went to what had once been the front hall, and there was the staircase, so lovely in its still proportions that she caught her breath. She turned back and saw the large woman staring at her and said, "I used to live in a house like this, built about the same time, I guess. One of those good old houses where people—" "Hell, you say," the woman said, and turned back to the counter. Halfway up the stairs there was a landing with a stained-glass window. When she had been a child, the stained-glass window on the landing in her house had caught the sunlight, and scattered it in 100 colours. Fairyland colours, Miss Harper thought, remembering. Miss Harper turned and went to the front room on the left. That had always been her room. She glanced in. It was ugly and drab and cheap. She moved across the room and set her suitcase on the bed. The mattress was lumpy, and Miss Harper was frightened at the faint smell of dark couplings and a remote echo in the springs. The windows were almost right, and the door was placed correctly. The closet, however, was on the wrong side. When she was a girl, the big closet had been her playhouse and her hiding place, but it had been on the left. She lay in the darkness with her eyes open, wondering how she'd gotten here. First the bus, and then the truck, and no one knew where she was or what was to become of her. She was very tired. The noise downstairs, which had been a jukebox and adolescent laughter, faded softly into a distant melody. "Oh, my mother is singing in the drawing room," Miss Harper thought. "My father is playing the piano." She could not quite distinguish the song, but it was one she had heard her mother sing many times. "I could creep out to the top of the stairs and listen," she thought, and then became aware that there was a rustling in the closet. It is as though something wooden were being shaken around. Miss Harper swung her legs over the side of the bed and sleepily padded barefoot over to the closet door, reminding herself to go to the right instead of the left. "What are you doing in there?" she asked aloud, and opened the door. There was just enough light for her to see that it was a wooden snake, head lifted, rattling itself against the other toys. Miss Harper laughed. "It's my snake," she said aloud, "and it's come alive." In the back of the closet, she could see her old toy clown, bright and cheerful. And then Miss Harper saw the big, beautiful doll, the doll with long golden curls and wide-lashed blue eyes. As Miss Harper held out her hands in joy, the doll opened her eyes and stood up. "Rosabelle!" Miss Harper cried out. "Rosabelle, it's me!" The doll turned, looking widely at her. The red lips opened, and the doll quacked outrageously, a flat, slapping voice. "Go away, old lady! Go away!" Miss Harper backed away, staring. The clown tumbled and danced. The snake flung its eyeless head viciously at Miss Harper's ankles, and the doll turned. They were all moving towards her. "Go away!" quacked the doll. "Go away, old lady! Go away!" Miss Harper slammed the closet door and found herself cowering against the far wall, with the door impossibly far away, while the closet door slowly opened and the doll's face, smiling, looked for her. Without stopping to look behind, she flung herself across the room and through the door and on down the wide, lovely stairway. "Mommy!" she screamed. "Mommy! Mommy!" And she fell, going down and down into darkness, turning, trying to catch onto something solid and real, crying. "Look, lady," the bus driver said. "I'm not an alarm clock. Wake up and get off the bus." "You'll be sorry," Miss Harper said distinctly. "Wake up," said the driver. "Wake up and get off the bus." "I intend to report you," Miss Harper said, almost crying. "I'll certainly report you." "This is as far as you go," the driver said. The bus lurched, moved, and Miss Harper almost stumbled in the driving rain, her suitcase at her feet, under the sign reading, "Ricketts Landing." The morning of June 27th was clear and sunny. The flowers were blossoming profusely, and the grass was richly green. The people of the village began to gather in the square around 10 o'clock. The children assembled first, of course. They tended together quietly for a while before they broke into boisterous play. Bobby Martin had already stuffed his pockets full of stones, and the other boys soon followed his example. Bobby and Harry Jones and Dickie Delacroix eventually made a great pile of stones in one corner of the square. The girls stood aside, looking over their shoulders at the boys, and the very small children rolled in the dust. Soon the men began to gather, speaking of planting and rain, tractors and taxes. Their jokes were quiet, and they smiled rather than laughed. The women came shortly after their menfolk, greeting one another and exchanging bits of gossip as they went to join their husbands. The lottery was conducted by Mr. Summers. He was a round-faced, jovial man, and he ran the coal business, and people were sorry for him because he had no children, and his wife was a scold. When he arrived in the square, carrying the black wooden box, there was a murmur among the villagers, and he waved and called, "Little late today, folks." Postmaster, Mr. Graves, followed him, carrying a three-legged stool, and Mr. Summers set the black box down on it. The villagers kept their distance, while Mr. Summers stirred up the papers inside it. The original paraphernalia for the lottery had been lost long ago, and the black box had been put into use even before Old Man Warner, the oldest man in town, was born. Mr. Summers spoke frequently about making a new box, but no one liked to upset even as much tradition as was represented by the black box. It grew shabbier each year. There was a great deal of fussing to be done before Mr. Summers declared the lottery open. There were the lists to make up of heads of families, heads of households in each family, members of each household in each family. There was the proper swearing in of Mr. Summers by the postmaster as the official of the lottery. At one time, some people remembered there'd been a recital of some sort, a perfunctory, tuneless chant that had been rattled off duly each year. Just as Mr. Summers turned to the assembled villagers, Mrs. Hutchinson came hurriedly into the square and slid into place in the back of the crowd. "Oh, clean forgot what day it was," she said to Mrs. Delacroix, and they both laughed softly. "And the hen, I remembered it was the 27th and came a-running." She dried her hands on her apron, and Mrs. Delacroix said, "You're in time, though. They're still talking away up there." The people separated good-humouredly to let Mrs. Hutchinson through, and Mr. Summers said cheerfully, "Thought we were going to have to get on without you, Tessie." And Mrs. Hutchinson said, grinning, "Wouldn't have me leave my dishes in the sink now, would you, Joe?" And soft laughter ran through the crowd. "Well now," Mr. Summers said soberly, "guess we better get this thing over with so's we can get back to work. Anybody ain't here?" "Dunbar," several people cried. "Clyde Dunbar," said Mr. Summers. "He's broke his leg, hasn't he? Who's drawing for him?" "Me, I guess," a woman said, and Mr. Summers turned to look at her. "Don't you have a grown boy to do it for you, Janie?" "Horace is not but 16 yet," Mrs. Dunbar said regretfully. "Guess I got to fill in for the old man this year." "Right," Mr. Summers said. "Watson boy drawing this year?" A tall boy in the crowd raised his hand. "Here," he said. "I'm drawing for my mother and me," as several voices in the crowd said things like, "Good fellow, Jack." "Well," Mr. Summers said, "guess that's everyone. Old Man Warner make it?" "Here," a voice said, and Mr. Summers nodded. A sudden hush fell on the crowd as Mr. Summers cleared his throat. "All ready?" he called. "Now, I'll read the names, heads of families first, and the men come up and take a paper out of the box. Keep the paper folded in your hand without looking at it until everyone has had a turn. Everything clear?" The people had done it so many times that they only half listened to the directions. Then Mr. Summers raised one hand high and said, "Adams." A man disengaged himself from the crowd. "Hi, Steve," Mr. Summers said, and Mr. Adams said, "Hi, Joe." They grinned at one another humorlessly and nervously. Then Mr. Adams reached into the black box and took out a folded paper. He went hastily back to his place in the crowd, not looking down at his hand. "Allen," Mr. Summers said. "Anderson. Bentham." "Seems like there's no time at all between lotteries any more," Mrs. Delacroix said to Mrs. Graves in the back row. "Seems like we got through with the last one only last week." "Oh, time sure goes fast," Mrs. Graves said. "Clark. Delacroix. There goes my old man," Mrs. Delacroix said. She held her breath while her husband went forward. "Dunbar," Mr. Summers said, and Mrs. Dunbar went steadily to the box, while one of the women said, "Go on, Janie." "Harbert. Hutchinson." "Get up there, Bill," Mrs. Hutchinson said, and the people near her laughed. "Jones." "They do say," Mr. Adams said to the old man Warner, "that over in the North Village they're talking of giving up the lottery." Old man Warner snorted. "Pack of crazy fools, listening to the young folks. Used to be a saying about lottery in June, corn be heavy soon. First thing you know, we'd all be eating acorns. There's always been a lottery." "Some places have already quit lotteries," Mrs. Adams said. "Nothing but trouble in that," old man Warner said stoutly. "Martin. Overdyke. Percy." "I wish they'd hurry," Mrs. Dunbar said to her older son. Mr. Summers called his own name and then stepped forward precisely and selected a slip. Then he called, "Warner." "77th year I've been in the lottery," old man Warner said as he went through the crowd. "77th time." "Watson." The tall boy came awkwardly through the crowd, and Mr. Summers said, "Take your time, son." "Zanini." After that, there was a long pause, until Mr. Summers said, "All right, fellows." For a minute, no one moved, and then all the slips of paper were opened. Suddenly, all the women began to speak at once, saying, "Who is it? Who's got it? Is it the Dunbars?" Then the voices began to say, "It's Hutchinson. Bill Hutchinson's got it." Bill Hutchinson was standing quiet, staring down at the paper in his hand. Suddenly Tessie Hutchinson shouted, "You didn't give him time enough to take any paper he wanted. I saw you. It wasn't fair." "Be a good sport, Tessie," Mrs. Delacroix called, and Mrs. Graves said, "All of us took the same chance." "Shut up, Tessie," Bill Hutchinson said. "Well, everyone," Mr. Summers said, "now we've got to be hurrying a little more to get done in time. Bill, you draw for the Hutchinson family. You got any other households in the Hutchinsons?" "There's Don and Eva," Mrs. Hutchinson yelled. "Make them take their chance." "Daughters draw with their husbands' families, Tessie," Mr. Summers said gently. "It wasn't fair," Tessie said. "I guess not, Joe," Bill Hutchinson said regretfully. "I've got no other family except the kids." "Then as far as drawing for families is concerned, it's you," Mr. Summers said. "And as far as drawing for households is concerned, that's you too, right?" "Right." "How many kids, Bill?" "3. There's Bill Jr. and Nancy and little Dave." "All right, then. Harry, you got their tickets back?" Mr. Graves nodded. "Put them in the box, then," Mr. Summer directed. "Take Bill's and put it in." "I think we ought to start over," Mrs. Hutchinson said as quietly as she could. "You didn't give him time enough to choose. Listen, everybody!" "Ready, Bill?" Mr. Summers asked. And Bill Hutchinson, with one quick glance around at his wife and children, nodded. "Remember, take the slips and keep them folded until each person has taken one. Harry, you help little Dave." Mr. Graves took the hand of the little boy, who came willingly with him up to the box, put his hand in and laughed. "Nancy next," Mr. Summers said. Nancy was 12, and her school friends breathed heavily as she took a slip daintily from the box. "Bill Jr.," Mr. Summers said, and Billy, his face red and his feet overlarge, near knocked the box over as he got a paper out. "Tessie," Mr. Summers said. She hesitated, looking around defiantly, and then set her lips and went up to the box. "Bill," Mr. Summers said, and Bill Hutchinson reached into the box. The crowd was quiet. A girl whispered, "I hope it's not Nancy." "All right," Mr. Summers said. "Open the papers. Harry, you open little Dave's." There was a general sigh through the crowd as Mr. Graves held it up, and everyone could see that it was blank. Nancy and Bill Jr. opened theirs, and both beamed, holding their slips of paper above their heads. "Tessie," Mr. Summers said. There was a pause, and then Mr. Summers looked at Bill Hutchinson, and Bill unfolded his paper. It was blank. "It's Tessie," Mr. Summers said, and his voice was hushed. "Show us her paper, Bill." Bill Hutchinson forced the slip of paper out of his wife's hand. It had a black spot on it. There was a stir in the crowd. "All right, folks," Mr. Summers said. "Let's finish quickly." The pile of stones the boys had made earlier was ready. Mrs. Delacroix selected a stone so large she had to pick it up with both hands and turned to Mrs. Dunbar. "Come on," she said. "Hurry up." Mrs. Dunbar had small stones in both hands, and she said, gasping for breath, You'll have to go ahead, and I'll catch up with you." The children had stones already, and someone gave little Davy Hutchinson a few pebbles. Tessie Hutchinson was in the center of a cleared space by now, and she held her hands out desperately as the villagers moved in on her. "It isn't fair," she said. A stone hit her on the side of the head. Old Man Warner was saying, come on, everyone." "It isn't fair. It isn't right," Mrs. Hutchinson screamed. And then they were upon her.